Harmony. Now, I know there's some bass players out there who think that harmony is just for jazz musicians and choir masters. Well, for those people, I've got some bad news, but I've also got some good news. So the bad news is that the bass, whether you like it or not, is a harmony instrument. Bass lines have been around for centuries before this instrument was created, and bass lines are harmony parts. That's what they are. So our primary functions as bass players are harmony and rhythm. Now, most of the videos that I put out, they tend to be more based around rhythm and groove, because that's what I happen to think is more interesting. And if you want to check that out, check out my book, Improve Your Groove. It's recently been published by Fundamental Changes. But I'm going to talk about harmony, because the good news that I referred to before is that harmony is so much simpler than you think it is. So simple, in fact, that I'm going to explain to you everything that a bass player needs to know about harmony in just a few minutes. Okay? Now, the first thing you need to understand is that there are only 12 notes. Really, only 12 notes. I'll go through them. A1, A sharp, B flat 2, B3, C4, C sharp, D flat 5, D6, D sharp, E flat 7, E8, F9, F sharp, G flat 10, G11, G sharp, A flat 12, and then you're back to A again, which is where we started, and the whole sequence just repeats itself up an octave. Now, that's something we call the chromatic scale, and this is another term that puts people off because they think, oh, that's music theory, I don't need to know that. Chromatic scale just means the 12 notes played one after the other, and that's all there are. There's just 12 notes. Now, the second thing that you need to know, and this is also really important, is I passionately believe there's no such thing as a wrong note. There are only 12 notes, and if you start classifying some of them as being wrong, then you're seriously limiting your options. There are what I call inside notes, and there are outside notes. So I'm going to explain what that means, but there's no such thing as a wrong note. It's not wrong to use outside notes, and it's not wrong to use inside notes. So our job as bass players, if we're going to build our own bass parts, we need to decide at any one time which of the 12 notes we're going to use. Now, how do you do that? The first and most important thing that every bass player should know is chord tones, or arpeggios. Arpeggios is just a kind of fancy classical term for chord tones. So how do you play a chord one note at a time? Guitar players play chords, bass players play arpeggios. A bass player who doesn't know any arpeggios is like a guitar player not knowing any chords. You have to know this stuff. It's really, really important. So, chord tones, what does that mean? Let's take an example. So an A7 chord. An A7 chord has 4 notes in it. It has an A, it has a C sharp, it has an E, and it has a G. So that's 4 notes. That's a 4-note arpeggio. A, C sharp, E, G. So if I'm going to build a bass line that fits over an A7 chord, those 4 notes are going to be the first place I start. Okay? So obviously the root note is A, and there are 3 other notes in there. If you don't understand the chord tones, you're going to end up spending a lot of time playing just root notes, and that gets really boring really fast. Okay, so that's already 4 out of 12 notes that we've used there. So those chord tones are going to be your first port of call as a bass player. But we don't want to just limit ourselves to chord tones. We can do more than just that. So what's the next thing that we can add? Well, the next thing we could add is we could add scale tones. Okay, so we can take notes out of the scale. Every chord has an implied scale that goes with it. And there's usually 7 notes in a scale. Now, I know not every scale has 7 notes in it, but most major and minor scales and the scales that derive from them have 7 notes in them. And this is what I mean when I refer to inside harmony and outside harmony. Okay, so there's 7 inside notes. The notes that go in the scale, they are your inside notes. Those are the notes that if you play them, those are your safe notes. You know that they're going to sound kind of okay over whatever chord you're playing. They'll all sound a bit different from each other, so this is where practice comes in. You have to spend a long time going over this stuff to really get used to it. But there's 7 inside notes, which leave us 5 other notes. Okay, 5 other notes which are outside notes. Now these notes, I call them chromatic passing notes, and it's not wrong to use them. You can use any note you like over any chord, but obviously the outside notes are more dangerous than the inside notes, but that doesn't mean don't use them. Okay, so if you only ever play using your inside notes, then your bass lines can end up sounding boring. It would be like having a movie where nothing bad happens, only nice things happen the whole way through the movie. Now, to me, that sounds like a fairly boring 2 hours. So you've got to have that kind of tension. You've got to have the, you know, the slight kind of unpleasant sounds, and then the release of bringing it back in. And that kind of makes it sound interesting. That takes you on a journey. It tells you a story. So that's what we've got to do. We've got to find ways of using all these different notes. Now, it's really as simple as that. You've got chord tones, you've got scale tones, and you've got chromatic passing notes. And that's it. There's no other notes apart from that. That's all you need to know. I'll probably put some more videos out there in future just showing you in detail kind of how to do this kind of stuff. But honestly, the best way to learn how to do this is just to play the bass. You don't need to go on a 3-year course on harmony or buy a massive encyclopedia of harmony and study it. No, the way to do it is to play the bass and not be afraid of playing wrong notes. You've got to learn how all 12 of these notes sound when you use them in different situations, and the only way to do that is to play and play and play. So go out and play the bass and experiment, and don't be afraid to play wrong notes. That really is everything you need to know about harmony on the bass.